Just checking in from a little recap of last week's episode. Get my spliff on. Suck it, federal government. So, this episode tended to be a little bit of what they call a 5-footer. We didn't do a lot of fighting or anything like that. I think the highlight of physical action might have been when my mage paw lost a few fingers in a mayonnaise battle. But we started off the day just trying to finish up a little research on the castle and the owner. Biggest concern was how do we fly this sumbitch? We got to get her off the ground. Like we ain't trying to leave this out in the field to rust. We want to take this classic for a trip around the woods. So while reading those books, Mumra attuned to the rod for tracking, and we decided that potentially maybe we would track the owner of the castle and we would get a hit. Not only to eliminate the obvious that they're still around, but maybe get a hint that they're not with us. And that's pretty much what seemed to happen. The old pointed rod right at Hadith, spun around and broke. Normally, I would blame that on Hadith's extra butthole and ball taint, but neither were exposed to the rod at the time. So I'm thinking we deduce that most likely because of the heavy Fey presence, the person was in the Feywild, like the Upside Down. Part of our deduction was this classic 80s Goldblum-esque one line leads to the next solution, which we pretty much all biffed shit on that. But we did figure out the Wi-Fi password for the steering. Sexy Zephyroth 69420, first letter capitalized. Once we did that, I figured to take it slow, just cruise up into the air, not trying to do anything fancy till we learn how this thing handles. We decided we were going to go to the Feywild, so we decided it was a great time to take a long rest. It had been a while. We've been traveling with the worst twins. I mean, if Chad was their triplicate, then it would explain something. But those Ranger twins, man. I always heard they were like fucking in the forest, but while we're getting our long rest on, we get camp, we start eating. Urix decides to rummage through the books. Elaine misrepresents what Urix is doing and thinks that he's a man who can't read. So she then spends most of the long rest talking to Urix like Bob talks to a waitress or a female bartender. When we wake up, classic mistake, we're 8 miles into the sky. I didn't turn off the up button. So I quickly resolve that issue. Go ahead and put us on a slow roll down to the earth while we figure out what we're going to do. Elaine decides to give us a little pep talk about how crazy the Feywild is. We figured that out. I mean, we're not dum-dums. Like I said, we know our job. We don't got to be patronized like we're some server at a bar where Bob is, explaining the order to him. And then we decided to put our little teleportation objects to use. Decide that if we're going someplace dangerous, we need someone who can really swing and hold their weight. So instead of summoning Harshnag or anyone like that, we summon Chad the Giant Slayer. Chad the Giant Slayer decides to finish his story he was telling the beauties at the bar. Without pause, That gets old super quickly. And while we're talking about how old that is getting, Hot Eats decides to saddle up his lions. So when we hit that Feywild, we got some snazzy new rides. Um, as Chad has continued to talk, doesn't realize that we need his help because he's such a badass. We decide we're going to send him home in the quickest way we know how. That's a straight line in the air. So Brox hits him with the judo roll, slides over his shoulder, grabs his collar, and sends him flying. Just to get a little more distance and a little less wind resistance, we cast Featherfall on him so he doesn't die, so he could once again have a badass story about how he flew from the castle to the ground. We were planning on maybe summoning Zephyroth through the hole, maybe summoning Harshnag, maybe some other creatures, other people that might help us. But in the end, I don't know why, we turned around and we decided we were going through the Feyhole. And with a classic quote from Quantum Leap, Brox hit the hard cam with an oh boy, and we all jumped in the wormhole. And that is where we left our adventurers last Thursday. Peace.